Well, hello and welcome to another amazing guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and I am stoked for the conversation today. Let me tell you why. So much of what we do here at Profit with Law is talking about running your business profitably, being able to unlock that profit percentage. As a matter of fact, one of the things that people have been asking me lately is, what is a healthy profit for your business? And although the answer is it depends, that's the legal answer, right? The real answer is somewhere between 35 and 50% is a healthy profit margin for your law firm. And so many law firm owners look at me when I give them that number and like I have two heads. Now, either because they have no idea what their profit margin is, or because they've only been able to unlock 10, 15%. Now, why is this important for today's conversation? Because unlocking the true potential of your business, creating massive profitability, is also the key to unlocking what the business is worth when it's time for you to exit. And you may be early in your career and be thinking to yourself, like, why do I care about when I exit? And the reality is that when you think of your business in that way, when you think of it as, okay, what is the plan? Like, when I complete my mission, I'm done. Now, either you're ready to retire or you're ready to move on to something else. You're ready to step away from the business. Sometimes you're going to succeed it to a family member, something like that. But what if that's not an option and you want to sell it instead of closing it? If you intentionally build the value throughout the course of building your law firm, what that's going to do is it's going to make you a really good business owner, because you're going to make really wise decisions along the way, but it'll also give you the ability to unlock massive value at the end. And that's what our guest is going to talk to us about today. Our guest today is Victoria Collier, and Victoria is the founder of Quid Pro Quo LLC. She is an attorney who successfully built a 7-figure estate planning elder law firm right out of law school, and then 18 years later sold it. She's a certified exit planning advisor. She's certified in business valuations, and she's the co-owner of an 8-figure business helping veterans and founder of Quid Pro Quo. All of this while being the sole financial provider for her family of 4 and operating a farm. Well, that is cool. All right. So without further ado, let's welcome Victoria to the show. Victoria, how are you today?
Thank you so much. I am doing great. Thanks.
All right. I'm excited to jump into this conversation, but whenever we start, we always start with the easy thing first. Our listeners don't know who Victoria is. Why don't you take a moment and just give us the quick broad strokes of who you are, your backstory, and how you got to where you are today. And then we'll jump into talking about the details of exit planning.
Sure. So I'm not sure I know how to tell a quick story, but I will try. And so I'll go back to, I was 17 and I moved out of my parents' house still in high school. And that led me almost nowhere other than in the military when I was 19. And so I was determined to be all I could be, which almost sounds like an Army billboard, but I went in the Air Force. And so through that, I became a paralegal, which then led me to be a lawyer. And when I was a lawyer, I learned early on you niche, or at least I niched, and that was in elder law. And that's because before I went in the military, one of my jobs, if you will, was as a hands-on caregiver in a nursing home doing nurses' aid work. I loved it. I had no idea it was a type of law until I was in law school. And I was doing all kinds of research on how do I help old people. And so I niched in that. And then what really propelled me as a business owner and a lawyer was that I found a niche within that niche, which was veterans benefits, and a very small type of veterans benefits called pension for old people who needed extra care. And that's when I started teaching other lawyers how to do this veterans benefits and how to build their business and build their practice, just as I had done in that. And so years later, full circle, in 2018 on Veterans Day, I'm poised to give a presentation to veterans. And that was the moment that I realized I can't do this anymore. And that's because there was a widow on the front row that heckled me And my first thought was not complimentary. And I thought, oh no, these are my people. And if these are my people and this is my thought, I need to get out of my practice. And I've always been one that said, if you're not happy, you need to go. Don't make yourself miserable or anybody else miserable. And that was my first indication that maybe things aren't quite as good as I think they are. And so at that moment, I decided, what do I need to do? Because as you mentioned in the intro, I was the sole provider of my family. I was 47 years old. I did not have retirement funds saved up. And so I needed to have a plan. And that plan was not to hand off my business or to close my doors. That plan had to include selling my practice and selling it for a very good sum.
Awesome. And you've since succeeded in selling it, right? I think you shared with me in 2020 is when you sold it.
That's right. I sold it in February of 2020, which was perfect timing for me. And I did have a transition period, and as most people who sell their firms do. But yes, we signed the documents in February 2020.
Awesome. And I'm assuming that you got what you had hoped to get for it. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. I got 6 times net profit, and that's a bit unusual for law firms specifically. But really what I hoped to get from it was not a specific amount of net. It was 2 lump sums up front, 30 days apart, but then also a kind of like a payment for 2 years every single month, because I knew, Moshe, that I needed to fund my next endeavors and pay for all of my expenses at home while I built my next 2 businesses. One was the farm, and one was helping other lawyers know that they can sell their law firms and not just close down. And so I got exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, I love that your solution to retirement was to sell the one business and open 2 more instead. It's very interesting, says a lot about you. And I think that law firm owners in general would appreciate and understand owning other businesses, other sources of income, not putting all your eggs in one basket. And I think that journey doesn't have to begin with selling the firm. It can begin with having a highly profitable firm, having massive cash being thrown off, and then taking that cash and investing it in other places, which might be other businesses. It might be in the market. It might be in real estate. There's a lot of different ways you can take money and use it to make more money. So I really think that there's a ton of power that you have as a business owner that you just don't have as an employee, where you can create a massive amount of cash in your business. And I think that if you look back at your journey, and I should really not assume this, but ask you the question, if you look back at your journey and you say, had I approached my law firm from day one from the lens of being able to sell it at the end and unlock the true potential of the value of the firm, would you have done it differently?
Absolutely. One of the things that I was arrogant about in the very beginning was that I had learned from an attorney how to do the practice area that I was doing. And there was this software company that was advertising what we do, but in a systematic kind of way with software. And I had spoken with a colleague friend that said, basically, you don't need that. You know what you're doing, so don't spend the money. And interestingly enough, 10 years later, I am partnering with this software company to actually build out the veteran side of what we did in our law firm, because he did the Medicaid side. And I would have systematized, I would have used technology much sooner than trying to recreate everything myself out of arrogance. So that's the number one thing I would have done, was invest in systems that make things go more efficient so that then we are more profitable.
Okay. I don't want to actually get lost in this end of it. I actually want to look at what does the exit plan look like. And there's a few different places I want to go here. So let's just start with the first. I'm just going to approach this conversation from assuming that our listeners can already see the value of understanding the exit plan, and maybe we should spend some time on that. But let's go straight to looking at that. How does the typical law firm sale get structured in the payouts? We'll talk about valuation next, but how does it get structured in how long does the owner need to stay on? And are, how is the bulk of it paid up front? Is it paid over time? What's at risk in that payment? Like, let's say the new owner just doesn't it doesn't have the business acumen you've developed over time, right? How much of that is at risk based on who the new owner is?
Sure. And there's a whole lot to unpack with just that question right there. And part of what my mission is to change the trajectory of how things are going and should go. And that's because law firm owners have been practitioners. They have law practices. They don't have legal businesses. And so when you ask me what's typical, I would say historically and still in the mindsets of some buyers, what's typical is that the seller has no option and they're desperate, and who's going to get these cases anyway, so why would I even buy it? So I'll throw you a nugget and you'll just be so grateful that someone's here to take your cases for you. And so I would say that what has been historically typical is that a buyer will offer potentially 20% of your ongoing revenue based off of your list that you've provided for 2 or 3 years. And doesn't that sound lovely? It is changing with over the past at least 5 years with coaches such as yourself helping lawyers actually run businesses, have profitable businesses where they have team, where they have technology, where they have predictable recurring revenue that is stable or increasing. That's a business. And that people are willing, lawyers are willing to pay money up front for. The very first law firm I sold was what I would call the turnkey law office. The owner was not necessary to be there. Someone else could do sales. Someone else definitely did all production. They had a marketing plan that was written for the entire year, and we could show how the actual revenue was being generated and where it was coming from. We had a buyer that paid 100% up front, and there was a transition period of 6 months. In the other, more traditional, historical is what I'm going to call it. I don't even want to call it traditional. I want to call it historical. The transition period would be about a year or two because you've got to transfer all that goodwill. You've got to transfer the relationships you had with referral sources because you were getting them from your church and prior clients, which are always good referral sources. But the goodwill takes much longer to transfer than when you have systems that are operating on your behalf and when you've created a brand that extends beyond your name. Then you're talking about 3 to 6 month, maybe 9-month transition where the prior owner is still involved. But really what I'm seeing is that we have a 1-year transition, but 6 months of that, the tail end 6 months of that is really just consultative as needed for the owner to ask any kind of questions that come up, but that the prior owner's not actually showing up every day.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you share and what I'm seeing is that there's really 2 major things to look at. And surprisingly, one of them is something that we really don't think about, which is how long am I still tied to this business after I sold it? And in the historical way of doing things, you'd be stuck in there for 1 to 2 years. I think it's in most cases is closer to the 2-year mark. I've even talked to some people who were in it for 5 years. that they were committed, because the payout was over 5 years. So it was, they didn't want to be hands off until they unlocked the maximum value from the law firm over those 5 years. So when they're decided, oh, I'm ready to retire, okay, 5 more years. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but when you're, I don't know, 65 or 70, and you're ready to step away and enjoy your life, now you got a 5 year commitment. It's pretty hefty. So that commitment and time involvement, I think, is something that nobody thinks about, and that's a huge difference when you're talking 6 months, 3, 6, 9 months. The other piece is, I noticed that you shared that you were able to get a certain amount of multiple of net income versus the historical way of doing it of 20% of revenue. And when we marry that with a law firm that has 35 to 50% profitability, we can start to see that there's a massively larger payout than 20% of revenue. Like 20% of revenue is actually very little compared to that other amount if you've unlocked true profitability in your law firm. So that's really where I want to go next in this conversation, is how are law firms valued, and what are the things? Well, let's start there, because the question behind it is really another question. I don't want to take you too far in. Let's just start with historically it was valued one way, but what's the better way to value it? And then we'll talk about unlocking that.
Sure. And so there's different models on how you value businesses in general. And law firms are a service business. So they are looked at even differently than, for example, if you had a products business or a software as a service business. And so the foundation of valuing any business is looking at your EBITDA, which is a fancy way of saying your earnings before taxes and depreciation, et cetera. And so we want to know, what is that net, right? What is the net? What's the take home? Because a buyer wants to know what they're going to be able to put in their pocket, not just what they're putting into the firm itself. And if they're getting financing, or even if they're not getting financing, but they're using their own money, what's going to be their return on their investment, and how long do they have to wait to get that? But then when we apply it to law firms, so let's say we start with EBITDA first, then we apply that to law firms, a service business, which historically has been tied so much to the lawyer. We have to look at, what I look at, the global. Do you have predictable income? Do you have recurring income? So if somebody has a subscription service, that's going to boost their income, their value up. Do you have a team? And in that team, is there a leadership structure? And do we have the team structured to minimize risk of loss? Meaning if someone leaves, and part of that risk of loss is not necessarily another team member, because I hear it. Oh my God, do I have to hire all these people? And that people just hear that as an expense, not an investment, and certainly not value. So some of that mitigation is, do you have written policies and procedures in place? And the more in depth they are, the more value your business brings to the new owner, because you could literally bring an owner in who knows nothing about that practice area per se, and can continue to operate using these procedures. The autonomy from the business, the owner's autonomy. Can you go away for 30 days, 60 days without the business failing? So in 2018, I took 30 days off in March, April, and no access to me. And I had just hired my professional legal administrator, and we didn't make payroll. Things were horrible. It was not a pretty situation, but it exposed all of our cracks. And the same exact year in 2018, in September, October, I took my mother to Europe and definitely did not have access. And I was not available for 30 days. And it was seamless at that point because we had learned from the first 30 days that no, I didn't have a business. I had a bunch of people who were working really hard to get things done, but they were still dependent on me. The next 30 days, they were like, why did you come back? And that's the kind of value that we want to build our business with. And that's what we look at when we do valuations.
My friend Mike Michalowicz, author of Clockwork, talks in there about this idea or concept of having a 4-week vacation. And what he says is that you're not taking a 4-week vacation because you're taking a vacation from the business. It's giving the business an opportunity to have a vacation from you, the business owner, because exactly what you laid out, like I went away for 30 days and that allowed us to see all the things that needed to be fixed because I wasn't there. And it created turbulence, but at the same time, it tested our systems and processes. It allowed us to figure out what needed to be fixed. And that's really huge. And I love that you put it, it's not just about the income, it's everything else that's creating the income that needs to be looked at. Do you have a system in place for marketing to happen, for leads to be generated ongoing, for sales to be made without the owner, for the actual service delivery to be executed, and for somebody to be able to be replaced easily if a position was vacated? All of those things create one holistic picture of a healthy business that somebody would be interested in buying. And another way that I like to look at it is, and this is part of how I pitch my coaching program, is I tell people, in the state of Arizona, and I'm sure there are other states already on this bandwagon, but in the state of Arizona, a non-attorney can own a law firm. And and this is, I paint it to try to show them that the faster they can get themselves out of the shoes of being the lawyer, the quicker they can unlock the true value of their law firm business. If I, a non-attorney, were to go into Arizona and open a law firm, what would be the very first hire I would make? A lawyer. I can't provide my service without hiring a lawyer.
And in fact, Arizona requires it.
Yeah. But even if they didn't, right? Like I wouldn't make believe that I could practice law, right? Like that's not the purpose of me owning a law firm. I'm owning it as an investor in a business, no different than buying a 7-Eleven. I know nothing about having a convenience store, but I'll buy it and read the manual and, go to the training and hire the right staff and put it in place and, as an investor in a business. So we have 2 hats that we wear. And, when a lawyer starts a law firm, they're at the disadvantage of thinking that I'm opening a firm so I can practice law. When in reality, they have a lawyer hat and they have the business owner or investor or CEO hat. And all the 3 things I just mentioned on the other hat are actually different hats too. And, so being able to make that differentiation and recognize that alone is a key to being able to unlock the true value of your law firm when you're turning around and looking to sell it, is that you're not the attorney. There's somebody else doing the legal services. You're not the salesperson. There's somebody else doing the sales. Getting to the point where the firm is running and profitable without you being one of the producers is key, because when you sell it, you need to extract yourself.
Well, and what that does is it allows the owner to determine what their path is and when that path is. Because as you mentioned earlier, just having different buckets of income and is helpful, because just because I've set up my business and now it can run on its own doesn't mean I have to sell it. That's a passive asset at that moment. And that can be building your wealth. And so your listeners may not want to sell their business at any time, but they might want to build their assets, their generational wealth. And one way of doing that is buying law firms. And so understanding how to value one, understanding what you expect from one that is desiring to sell is just as important. because I see this as, especially as you said, non-lawyers can own law firms in Arizona. I am a lawyer. I'm considered a non-lawyer in Arizona, but I can own a law firm in Arizona. I might want to go buy one. And yes, the first thing I'm going to make sure is there is a lawyer, because I am never going to step in and be the lawyer again in my whole life. But I do plan to own other law firms. And so we need to know what the value is. We need to know what systems they have and what team they have in place, whether we're on the buying end or the selling end.
Yeah, and the other thing to look at, like, is if you become a purchaser of Apple shares, for example, right? You're not going to walk into an Apple store and say, "Hey, I'm an owner of Apple and I'm here to, report for work," right? You're an investor in the business.
Right.
And so there's a difference between an investor and an operator. And, that's another differentiation or distinction you want to look at, is like, okay, when I'm turning around to sell this to somebody, I have to assume that the person buying it is buying it as an investor, not as somebody who envisions themselves being the attorney in the office. And if somebody's approaching it from an investment perspective, they're looking at, where am I putting my dollar, and comparing it to where else can I put my dollar. So they want to invest in something that has a high potential for better returns than another alternative that's maybe lower risk. And, that when investors are looking where to put their money, they're always looking at the difference between the risk and reward. Nobody wants to invest their money in something that is so high risk but doesn't have a good return. They're willing to use something that's very high risk if it has the potential for a very high return. So you have to recognize that when you're building your business to be able to sell it, part of it is decreasing the risk, which really goes hand in hand with making it profitable, because decreasing the risk means having the things that you just covered earlier, having those taken care of, like systems and processes, training systems, technology systems, automation as much as possible, recurring revenue like subscriptions, things like that.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the word risk. This is a hot topic for me at the moment, because both sides want to minimize their risk. And so a seller wants to get 100% of the money up front. A buyer says, I don't know that this income is going to keep going the way it is. And so I only want to pay 20% of revenue over time, which, by the way, is less than what some states allow as referral fees. So I think it's a horrible offer, but nonetheless, I do want to share this, though, that when you can create your business with profit and it's operating as a real business, the buyers should understand that if I were to start my own practice, I have a lot of risk. It may never survive. I may never get it to the level that I'm buying this business at. And so buyers always have a risk, whether they're buying a business or not. They risk not having the return on profit if they never buy it. And they also, if they started one, they risk of never getting it to the level of the one that they're looking at buying now. And so I would say that, yes, we should look at shared risk. But if you're a buyer that doesn't want any risk, then you shouldn't be in the business of buying any kind of business, much less a law firm.
Yes, I love that. So let me ask you this. We talked about valuation, how to unlock the value. We talked about what the structure might be like in the sale. What haven't we discussed that somebody should really be thinking about? And I know we're having a very high level conversation around this, but what other things should they be thinking about when it comes to viewing the business from the view of the exit plan?
The personal readiness, the emotions that goes into selling a law firm, of selling a business that you've created and spent 20, 30, 40 years at. You may feel done. You may be like, I cannot do this anymore. And yet do everything possible to sabotage the sale, unintentionally, unconsciously, because you don't know what's next for you. You don't have an identity outside the law firm. And so getting ready to sell is just as much about becoming personally ready as it is positioning the firm itself or positioning your finances to become ready. So that's the one thing we haven't talked about, is how very emotional it is, and becoming personally ready.
When you started talking about being personally ready and the emotions involved in it, it took my mind to another place, and now created this new question that I want to share, that I want to ask you. Um, a friend of mine, John Risby, known as the patent professor, you may
Yep,
know
I know
him,
John. I do.
having had your paths crossed somewhere along the way, because he's very active in the conference circuit and on social media. One of the things that he talks about a lot is branding your law firm and getting away from it being tied to your name. And he's actually coming out with a book called "If You Brand It, They Will Come." And I'm excited to hear about his book, and we're going to have him here on the podcast to talk about it. But this concept of moving away from, the law offices of Moshe Amsel to the patent professor, and decoupling the firm from your name. How much of that is necessary or required to unlock true value when you exit? And the reason why this got triggered by you talking about personal and emotional attachment is because when your name is tied to the business, it adds an extra layer of complexity to that attachment. Like if I'm building my brand Profit with Law, I didn't call it, Moshe Amsel Coaching Services for Lawyers. My plan was very specific when I started, because I have a much bigger plan of what I want to do in the world, and it's not just for lawyers. So ultimately, I'm going to build a platform that works, and I'm going to bring coaches in who I'm going to train, who are going to do the work that I'm doing. And then I'm going to move on to the next level of what I want to do. So it's very intentional that I don't have my name attached to it. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the name of the law firm, and whether that has an impact on the true value and the ability to, or the ease to be able to step away.
Well, I would say that you're singing to the choir. My name is Quid Pro Quo for a reason, equal exchange of value, which has everything to do with our clients and nothing to do with me. And before I sold my law firm, which at the time, your name had to be attached to the law firm. So I had a branded name. It was the Elder and Disability Law Firm of Victoria Collier. But 3 years before I went to sell it, or maybe it was even 5, I had a DBA of the Estate and Asset Protection Law Firm, where my name was not attached to it. It is a big factor when valuing the firm. Some buyers, they don't care, but many of them will, because you can't, especially when it's a first name and a last name versus just a last name, right? And there are some cool last names. They're like, that'll go. But it's a big factor. There's a law firm that I looked at buying, and I'd still like to buy, and it is the name of the other person. And how that goes in the formulation from a buyer standpoint is, number one, can I devalue with that, or does that actually bring more value because this person has a really great reputation? So then I'd have to say, well, then I want to buy the name, and I want to be able to use it for a certain period of time. And then I have to strategically plan that, okay, for the first year, it stays the same. The second year, I add my name to that name. The third year, I drop that name. So what it means is, as you said, it brings more complexities, but it doesn't kill a deal. It may devalue the entire firm, because now you've got to have this strategy of how do I phase it out.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. And have you written a book yet? I mean, it sounds like material for a book. Is it in the works? Is it on its way?
I have one in the works, and it is my goal to actually have the electronic version ready for my event that I'm having on March 30th and 31st to give to those who show up to the event. So, yes.
Wow, that's really soon and really exciting. I don't know. I just had this intuitive feeling that, this is definitely book worthy material, and it's got to be on its way. All right, as we wrap up this episode, it's a great conversation. I'm really enjoying it. And I think that if somebody embodies the practice of looking at their business from the picture of valuation and being ready to sell at all times, what that does is it it kind of encourages you to do all the things the right way and not to take shortcuts. And I think that ultimately, in the big picture of unlocking true profitability for your firm, it requires those things. It requires you to build your team. It requires systems and processes. It requires you to get yourself out of the weeds and into the atmosphere, to have that bird's eye view of the firm and how it's going. So when we end a podcast episode, I end it with the same two questions for my listeners, and I'm going to pose those to you one after the other. The first is if there's one parting piece of wisdom or advice that you want to give our audience, what would that be? And then the second is, if they want to learn more about you, get in touch with you. Maybe you talked about your event coming up in March. Maybe, I don't know when this is going to be released. Could be it's going to be released after that. But what is the next step for them to take to learn more about you or get connected with you if they want to explore this further?
Sure. Thank you. I would say that the one piece of wisdom I would impart is that we don't know when our last day at the law firm is going to be. What we do know is that there are things we can put in place while we have the opportunity to do so. The things that Moshe teaches you day in and day out while you're building your firm and building the profit. So take every moment to build that, because we don't know when our last moment is, period. As far as getting in touch with me, my website is quidproquolaw.com. And I encourage everyone to also become a member of our private Facebook group called The Art of Buying and Selling Law Firms, where you don't have to be interested in buying or selling a law firm immediately, because we give great information on all topics of law. And also, I have a podcast called Smart Lawyers Position to Transition. So I'd recommend people tune in to that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. Folks, we're going to link all that up for you in the show notes. It'll be right in the resources section in your podcast player, as well as at profitwithlaw.com. If you want to learn more about working with us here at Profit with Law, we have an elite coaching program that we run. If you want more information about that, go to profitwithlaw.com/elite. We work with law firm owners just like you to help them unlock true profitability in their firm. We talked about 35 to 50%. That's possible for anybody in any practice area. It's just a matter of creating a plan and then executing that plan correctly. And we can help you do that. The last thing is we are here once a week with an amazing guest, just like Victoria today. And we release those episodes every Thursday. We sometimes give you bonus episodes, but if you want to make sure you don't miss the next episode, make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Hit the subscribe button in your podcast player so you get notified when that gets released. And if you found value today, share this episode with a friend. There's somebody out there who's going to get value from it too. You can probably picture that person right now. It takes just 2 seconds to hit that share button, grab the link, send them a text message. Hey, listen to this episode. So we'd love it if you shared it with somebody today. And until next week, let's work on our profitability and just be enjoying the journey as we go. Take care.